Ladies, gentlemen, fellow 11th Street kids, welcome to my Peacemaker Season 2, Episode 5 recap, review, and breakdown. And we've got quite a lot to talk about in today's episode as Peacemaker is brought into Argus, finally to be confronted by Rick Flag Sr. We also get to see what that metahuman tinge, as Gunn described it, was when it came to Sasha Bordeaux. And Eagly, Eagly truly appears to be the prime eagle. And of course, we can't forget, we're supposedly entering into the final 3 crazy episodes where there's apparently quite a few surprises. Supposedly, things are leading into Man of Tomorrow in some way, shape, or form. So we've got to theory craft about that a bit towards the end of this breakdown. So fellow 11th Street kids, if you happen to be brand new here and you like Peacemaker and DC, of course, you are in the right place. Consider subscribing, and if you go on to enjoy the episode coverage here on the channel, consider leaving a like rating, consider hitting the hype button if you have it available in your location, and do not forget to leave your thoughts and theories down in the comments below. I want to hear them. I need to let it be known, I have no idea what's happening next week, so I can finally speak so freely as I haven't got a bloody clue what happens after this episode. So let's get into this, finally. So the episode picks up with another flashback to Rick Flag Jr.'s funeral 3 years ago, with Harcourt sat by herself, but this is when she's joined by Flag Sr. What I liked about this moment is we just get more context. I mean, obviously, that is the point of this scene, but it kind of, in your head, you think, okay, Flag Jr. must have spoke to Flag Sr. about his feelings for Harcourt because he mentions how Ricky loved her, and as a result, she'll always be family, and he's always going to look out for her, which is kind of a bit sad at the same time, because we've also had Flag Sr. manipulate Harcourt to, hey, you want to get back in Argus's good graces? Well, you might want to do this for me. Since this after the Suicide Squad, Waller has it out for Harcourt, which is where we hear him talk about how she's now been designated to Project Butterfly, which is where she actually comes into contact with Peacemaker once again, and it is pretty sad hearing Flag Sr. ask her who did it, who killed Ricky, because they wouldn't let him access the files, and she's like, so, I can't really get into that. And also, you just cast your mind back to Creature Commandos episode 1, where you have Waller say, I'm sorry about your son, to Flag Sr. in that moment. And the awkward thing about that was, he has no idea that you ordered his death. But we get to that moment where Harcourt says to Flag Sr. that the person who did this, they'll pay, she'll make sure of it, and of course that's because she knew she'd be working alongside Peacemaker, for only her to then befriend Peacemaker, become a bit of a 11th Street Kids family, and low-key, essentially, get feelings for Peacemaker as much as she doesn't want to admit it. Which is where we pick up where we left off at the end of last episode, with Harcourt waiting in the park outside of the Evergreen City Hall, and there's a bunch of Argus agents on standby to take out the Peacemaker. So this is where we see Judomaster spot Peacemaker, and he makes his way over to Harcourt, taking cover behind pretty much everyone along the way to avoid being shot. And that's because, after all, he knows that this was a setup, as Harcourt used the code word copacetic in their texts at the end of last episode as a warning. But the thing is, Peacemaker doesn't really care so much about the risk, because for him, learning the truth about what happened between, both Harcourt and him on that freaking boat party is more important to him, as ultimately, of course, it impacts his decision as to whether he will leave or stay in this reality. And so Chris asks if what happened on the boat meant anything, like anything at all. And, notice how she does keep avoiding answering the question, just having a go at him instead. So he calls her out on the question again, and in a bit of an outburst, she says no, she was drunk and she wishes it never happened. And he even asks if he was ever a consideration due to what happened between him and Rick Flag Jr. And she responds honestly, saying he was her only friend, so how could she possibly kind of ... but how could I ever possibly get with you after that? But at the same time, I've got a feeling that surely, let me know if you disagree, but they will get there maybe eventually, but it's still very damaging and complicated to move past. Which is when Argus tried to take Peacemaker in, and he's completely surrounded. Which is when we finally get to see a bit more about Sasha Bordeaux. And I say that just because, you know, a lot of us have been looking into her character from the comics, and it's like, okay, when are we gonna maybe learn a bit more about some of the traditional aspects that they could adapt here? And she says that she has a clear shot, but it's fatal, and we get a close-up of her eye, and we see some Cyborg level shit going on. So this matches up to her cybernetic implants from the comics, where Sasha Bordeaux actually turned out to be an OMAC cyborg, linked to the storyline with Brother Eye, which, you know, makes her incredibly dangerous, and she's given clearance to take the shot on Peacemaker from this cybernetic assessment of hers, but Harcourt doesn't want to risk anything happening to Chris, so she pretends to be a part of the team, taking him down. Now, meanwhile, we have Sasha Bordeaux not too happy with Harcourt at all, and it looks like these two completely hate each other, which does make me wonder and speculate that we'll probably, you know, I'm thinking for sure we're gonna have a face-off at some point between these two in the last 3 episodes. Now, I know Harcourt is a badass. We've seen that more than enough with fight scenes this season. But how is she gonna, like, go up against somebody with all of these cybernetic implants? And Sasha Bordeaux from the comics is also a badass, so it's gonna be interesting to see if they fight, how Harcourt could actually end up on top. Now, Harcourt fills Economos in on the whole Peacemaker situation, and this is when she asks Economos about this Bordeaux bitch, and he reveals that, yes, she is a cyborg. And after a plane crash, her body was all crushed up, and Argus replaced half of her body with machinery, which isn't really accurate to her character in the comics for those who may not know, other than, of course, her having cybernetics, if you will. But as for her link with Bruce Wayne, her ever being a bodyguard for him, or going on to be a part of Checkmate and leaving Batman's side, to then becoming a freaking OMAC cyborg, that chain of events hasn't happened. Now, Gunn did say the word yet when it came to Batman, kind of implying that arguably he could actually have Sasha Bordeaux in the DCU interact with him sometime down the timeline in the DCU or whatever, right? And I think that's fair to say. You know, I always say here on the channel that adaptations don't copy and paste from the comics when you know, literally adapt something. So right now we have a different origin to Bordeaux's cybernetics, but that doesn't technically rule her out on, you know, arguably interacting with Bruce Wayne and Batman one day, even if it's just in our headcanon. For example, for all we know, however this season goes down, maybe shite goes south for her with Argus, and maybe they could do a similar story in where she's appointed to be Bruce Wayne's bodyguard. You could always play around with that. It would still be different, but in all honesty here, I doubt any of this will happen, as it's most likely just a character that Gunn wanted to use in Peacemaker Season 2 with what he describes as, you know, with a bit of a metahuman tinge. Hey, let's adapt her. We're not really going to do that storyline anyway, but it would be cool to kind of bring her in here, and it's nothing deeper than that. Now, Harcourt then says that she's worried Flag is actually going to kill Peacemaker in the other room. So to avoid that happening, she asks Economos to book Christopher Smith into the system. So that way there's a record that he's actually at Argus and he can't just disappear, which is when we get that moment between Peacemaker and Rick Flag Sr. where he tells Bordeaux and Fleury to take a walk and then turn off the recording equipment. Now, Peacemaker does try and say something, such as he admired his son, even liked him, which is when Flag just beats the crap out of him, and he continues and continues and continues to do so, to the point of where if Economos didn't put Chris into the system, despite what we learn later on, it does kind of make me wonder, would he have actually have got carried away and crossed the line he could never really come back from? Now, Bordeaux has a go at Economos for booking Peacemaker, and that kind of really does just make me think that she's rotten, because, you know, what skin does she have in the game? I know she kind of goes on to say later on, like, oh, he killed this agent or whatever, and your son, but there is context next. I know Flag's argument is that, well, he could have disobeyed Waller like we did, Harcourt. But, Rick Flag Jr. never, as far as we're aware, meant anything to Sasha Bordeaux. So why is she just fine and dandy before knowing what Flag's bigger plan is to just go along with covering up murder? But that makes me kind of all the more happier that your boy Langston Fleury wasn't like that. Well, I suppose he didn't do anything to try and stop this from happening, which is kind of bad, but at least he did say to Economos that it was good that he booked Christopher Smith into the system, clearly showing that he didn't agree with what Flag Sr. and Bordeaux were up to, with, Borderline looking like they were going to kill him. Meanwhile, we have Adebayo and Vigilante at the cabin, and she gets a call due to her ad in the magazine, and this guy, let's just say, was calling her up for a completely different reason. Now, this is when we see that Red Saint Wild had made his way to the cabin. We can't forget that he did some Assassin's Creed Eagle Vision kind of juju at the end of last episode, so he knows where they are now, and he injects a rat with some poison, kind of was like cyanide or something, and we have Eagly land and play with it. But Vigilante tells Eagly that they're going to go get Peacemaker, and that distracts him temporarily, which is when a frickin' fox eats the rat instead, which really pissed Eagly off, but it ends up dying pretty horrifically from that poison. So Eagly knows something isn't right here. But to take a little pause on that, we have Argus let Peacemaker go, but we have Judomaster keeping watch. You gotta love how, with his obsession for flaming hot Cheetos, this extends over to the flaming hot steering wheel cover as well. Now, when we cut back to Flag in his office, we see him reading this Argus report about a trial for dimension relocation, discussing the RSL method known as recursive spatial looping, which exploits naturally occurring space-time faults. I read the whole report just for the sake of, maybe some Easter eggs or something being spotted that could allude to something else. And it doesn't say anything too crazy other than just talking sciencey things about an object successfully entering the recursive spatial loop, exhibiting a simultaneous presence in both the origin dimension and adjacent reality Delta 12. So without me reading the whole report out, it makes me wonder if beyond what we've learned about Argus's concern about the dimensional anomaly at Peacemaker's house, which we know is the QUC, they don't want to have another dimensional rift like what we saw during the Metropolis incident or the Luthor incident. This does seem to imply that Argus absolutely would still be very interested in utilizing dimensional technology anyway, especially with what Flag says to Bordeaux next. So Bordeaux enters his office, and Flag reveals that despite how all of this may seem, the priority is protecting the people of the United States, and he wants to find the dimensional rift. Not only so they can avoid another incident like the one in Metropolis, but for a greater purpose, to benefit us all. He says he can't say that he didn't enjoy pounding on Peacemaker, but the thrills were not his motivation, even saying that he gave that order for Bordeaux to kill Peacemaker, or to shoot rather, knowing that Harcourt would stop it. All leading to Peacemaker thinking that Flag Sr. is messy and just, purely motivated by revenge, which hopefully means that he wouldn't notice Judomaster on their tail, and that could naturally lead them exactly to what they're after, and that is finally getting their hands on this dimensional technology to put it into the hands of Argus. And for a moment, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know if this was something that Flag was just saying, when in all reality he would have killed Peacemaker happily if it wasn't for Economos booking him. But then again, Flag revealing that this was his plan all along does match up more with the Flag Senior that we saw from Creature Commandos. Because I didn't really want to believe, with everything that was being promoted about this season, that this Rick Flag Sr. was just borderline the antagonist of this season, even if there were, reasons that you could somewhat empathize with, but he was going to break bad. This now being revealed really does match up with that character that we saw in Creature Commandos, where it's like, okay, now he's discovered the truth, but he's still got the greater mission in mind. So with that being said, I am more inclined to actually believe what he is saying here, and that ultimately, he is the head of Argus now, so getting their hands on that QUC technology would ultimately be what their biggest interest is. But hey, if I get to punch Peacemaker an inch from death along the way, I'll take that if I can get it. But this wasn't the only interesting thing that happened in this scene, because Bordeaux reveals that she was only going to say that she has no problem with Peacemaker being taken out. But then she makes a bit of an advance, you could say, letting Flag Senior know that his plan was very impressive. And there's a bit of a vibe here. And we know from Creature Commandos that, my God, Flag is quite a ladies' man. So this is interesting, I guess you could say. And we obviously see them continue to flirt a little bit later when Flurry interrupts them. So is this actually going to go somewhere? I mean, I do wonder. I don't know if it's meant to be something important or just a little bit of a side flirty thing with Bordeaux. But either way, Peacemaker reveals to Adebayo that it was Harcourt who screwed him. Gotta love Vigilante getting jealous in the back, because Peacemaker is only like directly telling Adebayo in the car, and he just feels a bit left out. So Peacemaker goes back into the cabin alone with Judomaster lurking in the background, keeping an eye on him, which is when he calls Eagly to come to him, which brings us back to Red St. Wild getting out this freaking, like 7-foot gun or whatever the heck that was, and he shoots at an eagle in the sky, and he even hits one. But when he goes over to where it fell, it's not Eagly, which is when he gets struck by another eagle, and then another one, and more eagles just start appearing, and then more beyond that, and then Eagly himself lands. And so it actually does turn out that this wasn't like a bit about, oh, yeah, Eagly could be the prime eagle. No, Eagly really is the prime eagle, which is when he almost like regrets his choices, saying he didn't mean to, and apologizes, but it's too late, and he gets taken out by all the eagles pretty horrifically, protecting their prime eagle. And I was just thinking, like, Jesus, I guess what I have to say is, what a random subplot this season, but at the same time, I do love random, especially when it comes to the wackiness of Peacemaker, and it's kind of hilarious how we've now got added lore to Eagly being the prime eagle, and how Peacemaker has no idea about how special his eagle is, other than, how special he is to him anyway. But speaking of Peacemaker, this is where he decides to write that letter. So Eagly returns with Red St. Wild's finger, and Peacemaker just doesn't want to even bother finding out what the heck all of that was about. I mean, he's leaving this dimension anyway. Let's just move past that. But Judomaster doesn't want to risk Peacemaker slipping away for good, so just as the portal closes for good, that's another thing, he's closing it behind him forever. He jumps into the QUC, and just as Adebayo gets to the cabin with Vigilante, the portal is closed, and Adebayo realizes that he can't get back. When Peacemaker's in the other dimension, Keith tells him that he's got to suit up because they've got a kaiju downtown. Peacemaker even tells Keith that Eagly's going to be his sidekick from now on, which Keith kind of brushes off, but with it's kind of an obvious theory of Keith finding out sooner or later that this is an imposter Peacemaker. This is just going to be another piece of the puzzle as to what stands out from his actual brother. Now, this is when they find Peacemaker's letter, which was really sad hearing Adebayo read it out to all the 11th Street kids, especially as it cuts into Chris's voice. We even get that moment when he says he's going to tell Emilia yes, and that they'll work on it. And you can see how that hit Harcourt, as after all, this is the first that she's hearing of him actually interacting with another world's Emilia Harcourt, which must be having so many thoughts running through her head at once, just like in terms of how in another life, in another reality, they actually are together, which I think is only going to confirm internally that these feelings she's trying to just get rid of and ignore are very legit, because even across space and time and dimensions, there's other versions of her that are truly in love with Christopher Smith. We also see the top trio flying with all of their jetpacks. It's really sweet how Peacemaker said that if they turn over the alien kettle to Argus, all of the 11th Street kids will be in Argus's good graces enough to get promoted. So he had that in mind for all of them. And, we even get that moment where Adebayo gets up and walks over to the other room, and just seeing her face break, when she saw Vigilante just all alone, crying his eyes out, that just hit me. I think seeing Adebayo get sad and then get really sad, seeing a Vigilante be super upset knowing that his best friend has left him, quite possibly forever, considering he closed the portal behind him. It's just little things like that in Peacemaker that can really get you. Harcourt then gets up and says that they're going to use the alien kettle to get Chris back. And once again, we hear Vigilante say that maybe he can meet another him in there. And after all the times we've heard that being said this season, I mean, it's only been said a few times, but more than once or twice, it actually makes me wonder if we will see another Dimensions Vigilante. And surely if we do get that, it's going to be one who is the complete opposite of being a psychopath. Now, getting towards the very end of the episode, in the other dimension, we see the news report showing that the top trio kills the murderous Kaiju, and it's the exact same Kaiju from the Superman movie, which is fun. Now, I would have loved a very quick kind of CGI I mean, even if it was on the news and you saw the top trio 3D models just using their I don't know, the Captain Triumph suit to shoot the Kaiju, just something like that, that would have been cool, rather than cutting to the end. But I admit that's just me wanting to see a little bit more than just them jetpacking at the end. But I'm sure we will be getting more of what I'm on about in the final 3 crazy episodes of things to come. Now, Peacemaker, in his other dimensions Peacemaker suit, returns to Amelia Harcourt after handling the Kaiju with his dad and his brother, and they run towards each other in a scene just kind of straight out of a romance movie. And it seems that he's got everything he could want. He's firmly committed to his decision of living here now. And yeah, we're now going to see the battle to bring this Chris back. And they'll have to persuade him to walk away from all of that, everything he's ever wanted, which, you know, I think will have something to do with Harcourt admitting her feelings for him. But not only that, another strong motivator would be, I mean, being exposed for not being the actual Peacemaker to this other Keith and Augie. On top of, by the way, yes, I'm totally aware if this other Earth is very Earth-X-y at the same time. Because going back to what I was saying, I love how Judomaster has followed directly after Peacemaker. And so I think it now makes sense that Judomaster, again, just speculation here, I have no idea what's coming up, but Judomaster is probably going to be the one to completely mess up Peacemaker's other life in this other reality. And the way I see that happening is just simply through Judomaster revealing to the other dimensions, Keith and Augie, that, wait, you think this is your piece? No, this guy's from, and then they go crazy because obviously if you can imagine putting yourself in Keith's shoes and learning that your brother has been murdered by this other guy, even if it was in self-defense, I think Gunn's going to do that thing where, oh, not only have you killed your dad and your brother, not knowingly or intentionally rather in the past, but you've killed your brother, your dad, and now yourself, even in self-defense, whatever. But now you're going to have to, like, see a grown-up version of your brother who you can seemingly feel very close and connected to, and you're going to have to kill him as well. As well as your dad again, by the way. That is going to be so messed up. And obviously, that's going to easily allow Peacemaker to kind of want to come back to the main dimension. And it's a major cherry on top if Harcourt does actually reveal his feelings for her, and then they just build things from there on out. On top of that, we've then got potentially some crazy things happening in the final 3 episodes. I think those are some of the crazy things, but obviously we've heard that it links to Man of Tomorrow. We're expecting a cameo or 2 potentially from, I don't know, projects down the line. So that's why the Booster Gold speculation kind of made sense, because it's like, well, you could just toss in a character who's actually going to be a part of a future project in the DCU. But what if it's not that? What if we're going to get Shola Mardueni's Blue Beetle? On top of what we feel is obvious with Lex Luthor and Belle Reeve. But are we just going to get Lex Luthor, or are we also going to see David Corenswet's Superman? There's a lot. There's tons. I mean, I don't need to repeat all that speculation again, But I can see why most of the crazy stuff is going to happen in these final 3 episodes, but Gunn has said more specifically episode 6 and 8. But overall, once again, enjoyed this episode, and I'm just like super pumped to get into some episodes that I have no idea about what's coming our way other than the speculation I just gave you. So I'd love to know what you guys thought of episode 5. What are your theories going into episode 6? How do you think things are going to go down? Do you agree with me that Keith is going to find out through Judomaster just ruining everything? Do you think that this will also expose the larger Earth X theory? But if you're still watching at this point, guys, I'd really appreciate a like on this video, especially if you've made it this far. Consider subscribing for all kinds of DC videos just like this. But I'm gonna love you and leave you. So once again, thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow 11th Street kids in the next video. Goodbye.